first 100,000 is a bitch. People love that line. They slap it on thumbnails, quote it like it's a magic spell, and then go right back to doing exactly what guarantees they will never see it. The lie isn't that the first $100 K is important. The lie is what people think it means. They think it's a motivational slogan. They think it's a milestone the universe hands out for effort. They think once they hit six figures, life will suddenly get easy. That's not what I meant. That's not how the math works. And that's why 99% of so-called investors quit long before compounding ever has a chance to help them. The brutal truth is simple. The first $100 K is not a dream, it's a test. It's a long, boring, mathematically predictable test designed to separate the people who like the idea of wealth from the very small group who can tolerate what wealth actually demands. The test has nothing to do with intelligence. I've watched PhDs flunk it and janitors pass it. The test is about your ability to endure years of insignificant progress without doing something stupid. And almost nobody has that ability. The world has turned compounding into a bedtime story. You've seen the neat little charts. 10% a year turns this into that. A few decades later, you're a millionaire, maybe a multimillionaire. Nice smooth line going up and to the right. What those charts don't show you is how vicious the front end feels when you start from zero. They don't show you the 10 years where the numbers are insulting. They don't show you the years where you do everything right and it still feels like you're getting nowhere. That's the lie. Not that compounding works, but that it ever feels good at the beginning. Here's the arithmetic nobody wants to sit with. Suppose you're disciplined enough to save $8,000 a year. That's about $667 a month. For many people, that means driving the cheaper car, skipping the restaurant habit, not trying to impress your idiot neighbors. You do that for a year, invest it sensibly, and maybe you get a decent 7% return. Congratulations. Your $8,000 earned $560. That's it. After a year of saying no to yourself, the market hands you a few $100s. That's a set of tires. That's a dental bill. Mathematically, it's the beginning of something real. Psychologically, it feels like a joke. This is where almost everyone fails. They look at $560 and think, why am I torturing myself for this? So they raise their lifestyle instead. They buy the nicer car, move into the bigger place, take the vacation. They tell themselves they'll get serious about investing later, as if later will somehow be emotionally easier than now. They repeat this for 5, 10, 20 years, and then wake up at 50 with nothing compounding except regret. It was never that they couldn't reach $100 K. It's that they couldn't survive the years when compounding is invisible. People talk about the first $100 K like it's a finish line. That's another lie. The first $100 K is the entry fee. Until you have it, you're not even in the real game. You're in the warm-up area, pushing the snowball uphill by hand. Every dollar you have is a product of labor. Every bit of progress comes from your willingness to bleed a little on purpose. At that stage, the market isn't really paying you. It's just slowly agreeing not to punish you. You're clawing your way out of pure wage slavery into the first inch of capital. And because that climb takes years, the temptation to quit is constant. When I made that remark about the first $100 K, I wasn't talking to 20-year-olds sitting on a crypto exchange. I was talking about the single most important psychological barrier between I work for money and money quietly works for me. If you're 45, 55, 60, and you still don't have that first compounding base, you are in a very different situation than a kid in college. You don't have the luxury of wasting another decade warming up. Your margin for stupidity has shrunk, whether you admit it or not. And yet, the basic trap is the same. The early numbers will feel too small to be worth the pain. Let's be honest about why people actually quit. It isn't because the math is hard. It's because their egos are fragile. They want financial progress to look impressive right away. They want to see thousands of dollars pouring in, not a few hundred. They want to post screenshots, boast at dinner parties, feel like a genius. The first $100 K gives them none of that. The first $100 K is humiliation. It's 10 years of living below your means while everyone around you pretends to be rich. It's driving the old car while your brother-in-law rolls up in his new leased German status symbol. It's watching coworkers burn money on vacations while you quietly pile cash into an account that barely seems to grow. If you can't stand looking unsuccessful in public while you build real wealth in private, you will never cross that line. You'll just age into a more expensive version of broke. That's where mental models matter. People think they need brilliance. What they need is inversion. Instead of asking, how do I hit $100 K fast? Ask, what behaviors will mathematically guarantee that I never hit $100 K at all? The list is not mysterious. Lifestyle creep every time your income rises. Consumer debt at 15. 25% interest. Trading and gambling instead of investing. Refusing to track your spending because it's depressing. Believing that you can't save until you earn some magical higher salary. That combination is a Lollapalooza of stupidity. You don't need an IQ of 160 to predict the outcome. Do those things for a decade and you will still be the same frightened wage slave, just older and more bitter. Most people never perform this inversion honestly. They tell themselves comforting stories instead. They say, I can't save because my city is expensive. While they sit in a restaurant 3 times a week, they say, I'd invest if I knew more, while spending 0 hours actually learning. They say, the system is rigged, while shoveling money toward the very banks and corporations that own their debts. Then they look at someone who quietly stacked $100K over 10 or 15 years and call him lucky. The same way a man who eats cake every day calls the man who exercises genetically blessed. Here's another arithmetic people don't like. Take a perfectly ordinary income, say $60,000 a year. Not great, not terrible. If you can save 20% of that, that's $12,000 a year. If you put that away and earn a conservative 7% annual return, you can reach $100,000 in roughly 7 or 8 years. Not instantly, not tomorrow, but within a single working decade. No genius, no lottery, no leverage nonsense. Just discipline and time. Raise the income even modestly or increase the savings rate a little, and the timeline shrinks. But if every raise immediately turns into a nicer car and a bigger house, the math never even gets to start. You'll tell yourself the first $100K is impossible, while burning precisely the dollars that would have built it. Now put that same math into the life of someone older. Take a 50-year-old making $90,000, somehow still sitting at $20,000 saved after a lifetime of lifestyle inflation. It's not rare. It's practically normal. If he finally gets serious and saves $25,000 a year for 6 years, invests at 7%, he can still cross $100K in his mid-50s. It will hurt. It will feel late. He will watch people his age spend money like there's no tomorrow while he acts like there is a tomorrow. But the math is still on the table. If he doesn't flinch, if he keeps pretending the numbers don't matter, he'll hit 60 with the same $20,000 and a vague plan to work a few more years. That's not a plan. That's denial. The first $100K lie takes another form too. People think once they get there, they're done. They treat it as a permission slip. They hit $100K, then immediately inflate their lifestyle, or start speculating, or congratulate themselves by doing exactly what they avoided to get there. They misinterpret the milestone. The first $100K was proof that they could endure boredom and delayed gratification. Their response is to reward themselves by abandoning both. That's how you watch a decade of disciplined saving evaporate in a year or two of arrogance and dumb risk. The market is merciless with that kind of stupidity. You have to understand what $100K actually is. It is not security. It is not rich. It will not save you from medical bills or decades of bad decisions. It is simply the point where the math finally tilts in your favor if you keep going. At $100K, even a modest 7% return is $7,000 in a year. Add your own savings on top of that and something interesting happens. Your capital starts contributing almost as much as you do. A few years later, if you keep your savings rate high, your capital overtakes your labor. That's when compounding becomes obvious. But the leverage only appears if you treat that first $100K as a starting gun, not a finish line. Most of the people who quote the first $100K idea have never watched what happens if you quit at $80K or $90K or blow it after you hit the line. I have. It's ugly. The man at $90K who decides it's not moving fast enough and cashes out to start trading options will be sitting at $40K or worse when the first real drawdown hits. The man who hits $100K and celebrates by adding a shiny new car payment or a second home just turned his future compounding engine into a lifestyle ornament. On paper, he made it. In reality, he stepped off the only lifeboat he had. The financial world loves to talk about how to invest once you have money. What they don't like to dwell on is the decade or more you spend having essentially no capital at all. They gloss over the fact that mathematically nothing interesting happens to your net worth until you've stacked a meaningful base. Before that, the dominant variable is not return, it's your own behavior, your savings rate. Your willingness to look poor while you quietly become rich. Your refusal to indulge your ego. If you can't pass that test, the later parts of the game never even start for you. You'll just circle the same drain, year after year, excusing yourself with stories about the economy or your boss or the government, while the real problem stares back at you from the mirror. The irony is that the arithmetic is outrageously forgiving to anyone who is merely steady. You don't need 20% a year. You don't need angel investments. You don't need to beat the market. If you simply avoid debt, live below your means, and put a boring percentage into boring assets for a boring number of years, you will cross that line almost regardless of your personality. But that's precisely what people can't stomach. They want excitement. They want to feel clever. They don't want to look like the cheap one in their social circle. So they keep swapping money for image, and the image never compounds. Then, at 55 or 60, they suddenly discover that time, unlike them, has been compounding relentlessly the whole time. Against them. The question is not whether the first $100K is possible. The question is whether you can stop lying to yourself long enough to do the dull, brutal things the math requires. Most can't. That's why they quit. Not because the universe singled them out for unfairness, but because they refuse to accept that progress in the real world looks like nothing for a long time and then everything all at once. Compounding is not your enemy. Your impatience is. Your envy is. Your need to look successful before you actually are is. Fix those and the numbers take care of themselves. Refuse, and all the quotes and charts and Munger sound bites in the world won't save you. Most people's idea of looking at the numbers is logging into a brokerage app once in a while, glancing at a balance, and then going back to sleep. That's not analysis, that's superstition. If you actually sat down with a pencil and walked through your own arithmetic, you'd see why quitting early is financial suicide. Take your age, your income, your current savings, and your behavior. The picture writes itself. It's not cosmic. It's grade school math with adult consequences. Start with a simple case. A 35-year-old earning $70,000, starting from zero. If he saves 15% of his income, that's $10,500 a year, and invests it at a conservative 7% annual return, he'll hit his first $100,000 in about 7 years. 35 to 42. The early years will feel insulting. After year one, his roughly $10,500 contribution earns him maybe $700. He'll be tempted to sneer at it. But if he endures, he's across the line before 45. Now look at the same man 10 years later, age 45, who decided to wait until he was making more and spent everything in the meantime. He finally gets serious, saves the same 15%, now maybe $12,000, $13,000 a year on a higher income. He's starting a decade later with fewer compounding years in front of him. He may still reach $100,000 by his early 50s, but every year of delay carved real money out of his future. The math is identical. Only the calendar changed. That's all it takes to turn plenty of time into not enough. Now examine the late starter, the one nobody wants to talk about. A 50-year-old making $100,000 with $0 invested after a lifetime of chasing houses, cars, and status. If he finally snaps out of it and saves 25% of his income, $25,000 a year, for 4 years invested at 7%, he'll sit at roughly $110,000 by 54. That is not comfortable. It is not secure. But it is a bridgehead. It is the first time in his life that capital is a meaningful partner instead of a fantasy. If he shrugs and says it's too late, why bother? He stays at zero and marches into his 60s with no soldiers on the field. Same income, same years. The only difference is whether he could tolerate watching small, dull numbers accumulate instead of burning them to feel a little better this month. This is what I mean when I say the test isn't intelligence, it's endurance, and a very specific kind. Can you stay the course when the result is too small to impress anyone, including yourself? Almost nobody can. That's why 99% of investors quit too soon. They don't always close their accounts and walk away. They simply abandon the behavior that would have worked and replace it with something that feels better right now. They treat themselves with the money that should have been saved. They chase excitement in the markets because the slow, steady gains don't excite them. They start over every few years, digging up the seed to see if it's sprouted yet, then complaining that nothing ever grows. You can watch this play out in 3 classic failure points. The first is near zero, when you're between nothing and, say, $20,000. At that stage, everything is friction. Every emergency feels like an earthquake. 1 car repair, 1 medical bill, 1 layoff, and you're back to zero. Psychologically, it's brutal. You feel like Sisyphus rolling the boulder, and each time you get a few feet up the hill, something smashes you back down. This is where people decide investing doesn't work, because their first few years don't look like the fantasies. What they miss is that the math hasn't even started yet. At that level, you're not an investor, you're just someone trying to stop drowning. The correct response is to keep pushing the savings rate, kill debt, and accept that the first $10,000 or $20,000 is mostly about proving to yourself you can delay gratification at all. The second failure point is the middle ground, somewhere between $20,000 and $80,000. Here, the numbers are no longer trivial, but they're not yet game-changing. This is the danger zone for lifestyle creep. You start to feel like you deserve a little more because you can see 5 figures in an account. Your friends start congratulating you on promotions, new titles, higher income. Every advertiser in the world is whispering in your ear that with your success, you ought to upgrade your life. This is where most incomes grow and most net worths stagnate. The extra cash that could finish the march to $100,000 gets siphoned into a bigger house, a newer car, fancier trips. On paper, you're doing fine. In reality, you're stuck in a self-inflicted holding pattern. A decade passes and you're still sitting at the same 50 or 60,000 you had years ago, if that dotty. The third failure point comes exactly where the internet pretends the struggle ends. Right after you hit $100,000. That's when arrogance walks in. People who spent 10 or 15 years grinding to 6 figures suddenly decide they're financial prodigies. They confuse a simple equation. Spend less than you earn and invest the difference with genius. Now, instead of keeping their head down and letting that $100,000 quietly double, they decide they're ready for sophistication. They dabble in options. They buy whatever some talking head calls the next big thing. They borrow against their portfolio because why not put my money to work? One bad cycle later, they're back at $60,000 or $40,000, wondering what happened. What happened is that they quit the very behavior that got them to the line. In each of these zones, quitting doesn't look like throwing up your hands and walking away. It looks like small, reasonable-sounding compromises that happen to be arithmetically fatal. I'll just finance a car, I can afford the payment. I'll just take a break from saving this year. I need to enjoy life. I'll just use a little margin. Rates are low. Each of these decisions might feel harmless in isolation. Combine them, and you've created a lollapalooza of negative compounding. High fixed expenses, debt that eats your cash flow, and volatility amplified by leverage. In that environment, the first $100,000 becomes not just hard, but almost unreachable. You didn't fail because the market betrayed you. You failed because you built a life where the math had no room to help you. Now let's be clear about what happens if you don't quit. Suppose you do reach that first $100,000, and unlike the masses, you don't treat it like a lottery win. You keep your savings rate intact. You avoid the urge to celebrate with more consumption. You leave the money working. What does that do? Take $100,000 compounded at 7% annually. Left alone, with no additional contributions, it becomes roughly $196,000 in 10 years, $386,000 in 20. With modest additional savings, say $10,000 a year for 20 years, you're now looking at around $540,000, $600,000. Increase that annual contribution to $15,000, and you're in the neighborhood of $800,000 by the end of 2 decades. That is how the first $100,000 turns into something that can actually fund a retirement. Not by magic, but by stubbornly not getting in its way. Now compare that to the guy who quit at $60,000 because it wasn't moving fast enough and decided to spend more instead. Let's be generous and say he leaves the $60,000 alone at the same 7%, no more contributions. In 20 years, that becomes about $232,000. That's real money, but it's a very different universe from the $500,000, $800,000 you get by crossing the line and continuing to shovel in fresh capital. The difference between quitting at $60,000 and grinding to $100,000 is not $40,000. It's hundreds of thousands in future compounding. You'll never set the pain you avoid today cost you options you can't even imagine later. E. For the older man, this arithmetic is even more unforgiving and even more important. If you are 50 and you somehow assemble $100,000 by 55 and then let it grow at 7% without touching it, you can expect roughly $197,000 by 65 and around $387,000 by 75. If on top of that, you keep adding $15,000 a year from 55 to 65, your balance by 65 is no longer $200,000, it's closer to $350,000, $380,000, 3. Stretch the contributions a bit longer and the total climbs further. Is that billionaire money? No. Is it the difference between living entirely on a meager government check and having breathing room in old age? Absolutely. Now ask what happens if you keep telling yourself it's too late and never build the first base. The answer is simple. You age into complete financial dependence. This is why I have so little patience for people who whine about the difficulty but refuse to give up the behaviors that make it impossible. You can't keep the big house, the luxury car lease, the constant vacations, and also have the first $100,000. Pick one. The math does not care about your feelings. It doesn't care how stressed you are. It doesn't care how much you deserve a break. It only cares about inputs. Savings rate, time, return, discipline. Everything else is noise. People quit because they don't like what the equation is telling them. So instead of changing their behavior, they change the story they tell themselves. That's how you get a society full of people with high incomes, expensive lives, and pathetic net W, ORTHS. .W. There's another piece to this that almost nobody talks about because it sounds harsh. Until you reach that first serious chunk of capital, you do not have an investing problem. You have a behavior problem. People ask, where should I put my money? When what they really should be asking is, why can't I stop giving it away to restaurants, car dealers, and lenders? They obsess over choosing the right stock, the right fund, the right guru, as if the difference between a 7% return and an 8% return matters when they're only putting away $2,000 a year. It doesn't. If you're only saving crumbs, even a brilliant portfolio won't save you. At that stage, the only thing that matters is how big a slice of your income you're willing to keep for your future self instead of feeding to your present ego. If you accept that, the circle of competence suddenly becomes brutally simple. Your circle, in the beginning, is not Tesla versus Coca-Cola. It's not value versus growth. It's not which ETF or which bond fund. Your circle of competence is whether you can reliably spend less than you earn for 5 to 10 years in a row without bailing out at the first sign of boredom or discomfort. Most of the world fails that test. They look at their checking account like a scoreboard. If there's money left at the end of the month, the reflex is to find a way to spend it. The rare few rewire that reflex. Money left over is not free to enjoy. It is raw material for capital. They push it out of reach into something boring and compounding, and they repeat that move every month, regardless of mood. There's another piece to this that almost nobody talks about because it sounds harsh. Until you reach that first serious chunk of capital, you do not have an investing problem. You have a behavior problem. People ask, where should I put my money? When what they really should be asking is, why can't I stop giving it away to restaurants, car dealers, and lenders? They obsess over choosing the right stock, the right fund, the right guru, as if the difference between a 7% return and an 8% return matters when they're only putting away $2,000 a year. It doesn't. If you're only saving crumbs, even a brilliant portfolio won't save you. At that stage, The only thing that matters is how big a slice of your income you're willing to keep for your future self instead of feeding to your present ego. If you accept that, the circle of competence suddenly becomes brutally simple. Your circle, in the beginning, is not Tesla versus Coca-Cola. It's not value versus growth. It's not which ETF or which bond fund. Your circle of competence is whether you can reliably spend less than you earn for 5 to 10 years in a row without bailing out at the first sign of boredom or discomfort. Most of the world fails the test. They look at their checking account like a scoreboard. If there's money left at the end of the month, the reflex is to find a way to spend it. The rare few rewire that reflex. Money left over is not free to enjoy. It is raw material for capital they push it out of reach into something boring and compounding. And they repeat that move every month regardless of mood. Once you finally have that discipline and the first $100,000 exists, then, and only then, does the question of how to invest deserve more of your attention. But notice what that implies for quitting. If you give up before you've built the base, you never get to the interesting part of the game at all. You spend your entire life playing the tutorial level, dying to the same traps in different costumes. Debt, envy, lifestyle creep, impatience. You never even see what happens when your capital starts generating more capital than you can contribute yourself, because you never gave it the chance. You kept eating the seed corn and then complaining that you had no harvest. The tragedy is that the people who quit are often only 1 or 2 uncomfortable years away from the psychological tipping point. There's a moment, usually somewhere around that $100,000 mark, where the equation shifts. Your yearly investment returns cross your annual contributions. Suddenly, for the first time, the money you already have is out-earning the new money you add. $100,000 at 7% is $7,000. If you're adding $500 a month, that's $6,000 a year. You just watched your capital do more work than you did. That is the moment when compounding stops being a theory in a book and becomes something you can feel. That's when discipline gets easier, not harder. If you've survived long enough to experience most people never do, they sabotage themselves right before the turn. It's like quitting a marathon at mile 20 because you're tired, not knowing that the real payoff of finishing wasn't the medal, it was proving to yourself you don't break when it hurts. The first $100 K isn't just an amount. It's the mile marker where you discover whether you're in the 1% who can actually delay gratification long enough for the math to bend in their favor. The rest are tourists. They show up, jog a few miles, then step off the course and complain that marathons are a scam. If you don't want to be one of them, you have to stop treating the journey to $100,000 like a feel-good slogan and start treating it like what it is, an elimination round. The game is trying to throw you out long before you qualify for the good seats. Every emergency, every temptation, every flattering advertisement, every friend who tells you to live a little before you get too old is part of that filter. The market doesn't have to beat you. Your own instincts will do the job for it unless you consciously override these. So the real question becomes, how do you behave if you want to be in the 1% who make it through this filter and don't quit too soon? What concrete rules do you follow? Especially if you're no longer young, especially if you've already wasted time. That's not a matter of inspiration. It's a matter of design. You have to build a life where quitting is harder than continuing, not the other way around. And that requires some brutal, unromantic decisions about money, work, and ego. You start by inverting the problem. Don't ask, how do I motivate myself to keep going? Ask, what structure would make it very hard for me to stop? Human willpower is weak, especially when dragged through years of boredom, so you don't build a plan that depends on willpower. You build one that depends on inertia. You turn saving and investing from a choice into a default. That means the money never sits around waiting to be spent. It disappears from your checking account before you can get clever with it. If your savings rate is 20%, then 20% is gone on payday, every payday, without you deciding afresh. If you have to manually move money every month, you're designing for quitting. One bad week, one argument, one big bill, and you skip a month. Then another. Then a year. From there, you attack the other side of the equation, fixed expenses. Investors who survive, especially later in life, treat fixed costs like enemies. Every dollar you owe every month, no matter what, is a shackle on your compounding. Rent, mortgage, car payments, subscriptions, debt service. All of it is a claim on your future cash flow before you ever get to pay yourself. That's fine when you're 25 and ignorant. It's suicide when you're 50 and behind. If you want the first $100,000, you have to shrink the list of people who get paid before you do. That might mean moving down a house instead of up. It might mean driving a car that looks beneath your income. It might mean cutting away every recurring expense that exists purely to signal status. You're not trying to look rich. You're trying to stop being mathematically poor. This is where opportunity cost stops being an academic phrase and starts being a knife. Every optional dollar you spend is not just one less dollar saved. It is one less dollar multiplied over 10 or 20 years. A man pushing for his first $100,000 who spends an extra $500 a month on a car is not treating himself. He is volunteering to arrive at 60 with tens of thousands less in the only account that matters. Pretend the showroom salesman is standing there saying, "Sign here if you'd like to swap part of your future independence for leather seats and a logo." Most men sign without a second thought. Later, they say the first $100 K is impossible. If you're no longer young, the design has to be even more brutal. A man of 25 can afford a few years of stupidity and still recover. A man of 55 can't. At 55, the gap between on track and ruined is much narrower. So your rules must be harsher. No new consumer debt, not for any reason. No borrowing to buy toys ever. No trading on margin, no matter how safe you think it is. No get-rich-quick schemes. And that includes anything promising double-digit monthly returns. If you haven't hit the first $100,000 by midlife, you do not have the surplus to gamble. You are not playing with house money. You are playing with whatever faint chance you have of not working until you drop. You also narrow your circle of competence to the point of embarrassment. Until you have that base capital, you have no business pretending to be a stock-picking genius. The correct investment for most people grinding their way to $100,000 is a low-cost, broad-market index fund or a small set of simple, durable businesses they actually understand. Not because that's glamorous, but because you don't need glamour. You need a machine that quietly compounds while you do the heavy lifting of saving. You're not trying to outperform. You're trying not to blow up. Once you have a meaningful base and a margin of safety, then you can afford to entertain the idea that you might know something the market doesn't. Before then, humility is cheaper than tuition. Margin of safety doesn't just apply to stocks. It applies to your life. Don't run your household budget with zero slack and then act shocked when an emergency wipes out your progress. Build a cash buffer. A few months of expenses in simple cash or equivalents makes it far less likely that one unlucky event sends you back to zero. People whine that holding cash reduces returns. So does getting wiped out. The point of a margin of safety is not to maximize your spreadsheet's beauty. It's to minimize the chances that reality kicks over your sandcastle. If you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s and still trying to reach that first compounding base, your main job is not to be clever. It's to stay in the game. And then there's envy. Envy is a Lollapalooza effect all by itself. Combine it with easy credit, advertising, and social media, and you get a society of people who will sabotage compounding just to avoid feeling behind. Your neighbor's new boat, your colleague's remodeled kitchen, your brother-in-law's vacation photos. None of these things write you checks in old age, yet people will wreck their savings rate to keep up with them. If you want the first $100,000, you must treat envy like rat poison. Don't taste a little. Keep it out of the house. The moment you find yourself wanting something because someone else has it, you should hear a siren in your head. This is how fools stay broke. You design your environment accordingly. Stop marinating your mind in financial pornography. If your media diet is a constant stream of hot stocks, rich kid lifestyles, and economic doomsday, you will not stay rational. You will get whipsawed between greed and fear, and both states are hostile to boring, steady accumulation. Remove triggers. Unfollow the clowns flashing rented cars. Ignore the talking heads predicting crashes every week. You are not trying to outguess the market. You are trying to build a base that will leave you less at the mercy of any market at all. For men in midlife, there is one more piece people hate to confront: work. Not the existence of it. That's obvious. But the kind. If you're 50 and behind, you may need to change where and how you work to increase your savings rate. That might mean taking on a higher paying but less prestigious role. It might mean a side business that is dull but predictable, not glamorous and risky. Many refuse this. Their ego would rather cling to a title than build capital. They'd rather be a director with nothing saved than a plain old salesperson with $200,000 in boring index funds. You have to decide whether you want status in your email signature or options when you're 70. The math doesn't allow both if you've started late. If you have a family, you tell them the truth. You don't lie to your spouse and children about where you stand. You tell them, we are behind. We are going to live below our appearance for a while so that we don't have to beg when we're old. You frame discipline as protection, not punishment. Because that's what it is. This isn't about denying yourself forever. It's about front-loading the sacrifice in the years when you still have the health and earning power to do something about it. At 30, working extra or cutting back hurts. At 65, being broke hurts more. Pick when you want the pain. All of this sounds harsh because it is. But look at the alternative. Without that first serious base of capital, the back half of your life is entirely dependent on your body holding up, your employer's goodwill, and the government's solvency. That's not a plan. That's a prayer. Your 70-year-old self can't go back in time and redo his 40s and 50s. He can only live with whatever that younger man chose. If you knew you were going to have to sit across the table from your future self and explain your decisions, would you feel proud or ashamed? I could have saved, but I wanted a nicer SUV. I could have avoided debt, but I wanted a bigger house. That's what it usually comes down to. Trading enduring freedom for temporary vanity. The first $100 K-lie is that it's some magical destination everyone is trying to reach, and that the universe has conspired to keep it from them. The reality is uglier and simpler. The door is not locked. The path is not hidden. The instructions are not complicated. Spend less than you earn. Avoid debt. Invest steadily in simple vehicles. Refuse to inflate your lifestyle every time your income rises. Protect yourself from your own worst impulses. Push that behavior long enough, and the first $100,000 appears almost as a side effect. But because that path is dull, because it doesn't feed the ego, because it requires being willing to look poorer than you are for years, almost nobody walks it. If you are honest, you will admit that the roadblocks are in your habits, not in the heavens. That's the bad news and the good news. Bad, because it means you can't blame the world forever. Good, because it means you still have leverage. Whether you are 25 or 65, the only question that matters is, from today forward, will you behave in a way that the math rewards, or will you keep insisting that the rules bend for you? They don't. Compounding doesn't care about your story. It just sits there, waiting for enough capital and enough time. Give it both, and it will quietly change your life. Deny it either, and you will grow old wondering why nothing ever turned in your favor. So stop romanticizing the first $100,000 and start respecting it. It is not an inspirational quote. It is the minimum ante to sit at the real table. Get there by any honest discipline means you can. Cut what you have to cut. Earn what you have to earn. Ignore who you have to ignore. And when you feel the urge to quit because it's taking too long, remember, the clock will keep ticking whether you save or not. In 10 years, you can be a decade closer to freedom with a compounding base under you. Or you can be a decade older with nothing but stories about why it was all too hard. The first 100,000 is a bitch. Staying below it for life is worse. Choose which pain you want.